What happens when a cop with a power complex meets the wrong woman? It started on a Wednesday night, just after 11 p.m., the kind of storm that empties Toledo's streets and turns traffic lights into bleeding smears of red and green. Rain hammered the asphalt. Wipers beat a hard, metronomic time. A lone sedan slid through the wash, steady, unremarkable, already halfway home in the driver's mind. Parked off Reynolds Road with lukewarm coffee and thinning patience, Sergeant Mitch Brennan watched the silhouette drift by, saw an opening, and snapped the switch. The strobes bloomed before she had even cleared the intersection. In the driver's seat, Viola Hayes guided her car carefully through sheets of water. Her hands were steady, her jaw relaxed, though her eyes tracked every shimmer of the flooded road. On the passenger seat sat a bag of takeout still holding its heat, waiting to be unpacked at her kitchen table where her daughter had likely fallen asleep with homework spread around her. To anyone glancing in, she was just another woman driving home late, the kind who avoided trouble by obeying every rule. She wasn't speeding, she wasn't weaving, she wasn't the type to attract a spotlight, but trouble had found her anyway. Brennan leaned forward in his cruiser, muttering as if the storm itself were his audience. Taillights dim. Dangerous in weather like this. His partner, Officer Daniels, sat stiff beside him, glancing through the blurred windshield. In this rain, everyone's dim, he said under his breath. Brennan ignored him. 20 complaints had come and gone over the years. Allegations of intimidation, bias, unlawful stops. 20 times the system had swallowed the paper and spit out nothing. He had built his confidence on those erasures. Trust me, he told Daniels, his lips curling. This one's worth the stop. The siren's sharp whoop cut through the storm. Viola pulled to the shoulder without hesitation, hands visible on the wheel, movements measured. She drew one slow breath, then tapped her phone on the dashboard mount. A small red glow came alive. The camera began to record, its eye steady and impartial. Rain lashed against her window as Brennan approached, flashlight beams slashing through the night. He tapped hard on the glass. Viola lowered it a few inches, water dripping onto her lap. License and registration, Brennan barked. His tone was less request than command, more accusation than inquiry. Officer, may I ask the reason for the stop? Her voice was even, a low calm that did not waver. Tail lights too dim. Could cause an accident, and don't take that tone with me, Brennan snapped. Step out of the vehicle. From the cruiser, Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Sarge, she's... Write her up non-compliant, Brennan cut in, not bothering to lower his voice. Viola unlocked the door, unhurried, and stepped into the rain. It soaked her instantly, plastering her hair to her face, turning her sweater heavy. Brennan circled the car, beam darting, lips twisting around words half-spoken, half-spat. Around them, porch lights from the grand homes lining the street glowed faintly, expensive facades rising like silent witnesses. It was the kind of neighborhood where strangers drew attention, where quiet wealth wrapped itself in gates and hedges. Yet here, on a manicured street built on order, humiliation was unfolding in the open. Nice ride. Wonder how you paid for it. People like you don't usually keep cars this clean unless they're borrowed or stolen. She met his gaze and said nothing. Silence can be louder than defiance. Brennan stopped in front of her, standing close enough that the rain between them felt like a wall of sparks. You think you're special? Because you drive straight, papers tidy, act like you belong here? You're not special. Around here, women like you keep your head down. Or you end up in cuffs. His hand brushed the metal at his belt, a movement more habit than need, but calculated all the same. Daniels, still at the cruiser, shifted again. His expression said what he did not. that this stop was turning into something else, something heavier. Viola lifted her chin slightly. She had answered men like this before, though not in storms and not on roads like Reynolds. The camera on her dashboard blinked quietly through the rain, storing every word, every sneer, every false charge. Inside an office miles away, Eliza Reed typed up a legal memo, unaware that her phone would soon buzz with a call that would change her week. Across town, defense attorney Carl Peters drained his coffee and stacked his files, not yet realizing he would be hired to defend a case no union could shield. In a quiet chamber, Judge Clarence Doyle flipped through his docket, underlining names he thought routine. One line would soon demand all his attention. Hayes, Viola. On the roadside, Brennan pulled the cuffs free. Non-compliant. Disorderly conduct. Hands behind your back. The words carried the weight of rote habit, as though he had said them 100 times and expected them to vanish into the same silence. Viola did not resist. The steel closed cold around her wrists, rain running down her arms like wires of ice. The flashlight caught the reflection in her eyes, calm, unwavering, holding a truth Brennan could not yet see. Behind her, on the dashboard of her car, the red light of the camera kept glowing, steady, patient, waiting for its turn in the light. The rain did not ease when Viola lowered her window. It only grew harder, beating against the car like fists on a locked door. Sergeant Mitch Brennan tilted his flashlight, the beam slicing through the rains, landing squarely on her face. The water on the glass distorted her expression, but he read what he wanted to see. Hesitation, a target. His hand hovered close to his holster, a gesture rehearsed so often it had become part of his silhouette. "Where you headed this time of night?" His voice carried a hard edge, not curiosity, but accusation. He leaned closer, water dripping from his sleeve onto the glass. "This car even yours?" Viola kept both hands visible, resting gently on the wheel. Her calm was deliberate, a measured resistance. "Officer, I was driving in my lane, at the proper speed. Everything is in order." The simple answer, spoken without tremor, irritated him more than refusal would have. He jabbed the light toward her registration card still tucked in the visor. "Get out, now. Attitude like that won't fly with me." Behind him, Officer Daniels shifted in the glow of the cruiser's dashboard. He watched the exchange through streaked rain, his jaw tightening. Daniels had seen this script before, Brennan finding reasons, building a case out of thin air. The 20 complaints that vanished never reached Daniels's desk, but the whispers in the locker room had filled the gaps. He wrote nothing down, not yet. His hesitation was another kind of witness. Viola unlocked the door and pushed it open, her movements slow enough to broadcast caution. The rains swallowed her instantly, soaking through the gray sweater, flattening her hair against her face. As she stepped into the headlight's wash, the small clip in her hair gleamed faintly, an ordinary accessory made sharp against the downpour. She straightened, facing Brennan, the rains painting her in silver streaks. Brennan circled her car, flashlight beam darting over the hood, the back seat, the floor mats. His words came in fragments, half muttered, half aimed at her. "Cars like this don't show up here without reason. You don't live in this neighborhood. You think you can just drive through a gated community at midnight without raising suspicion?" He wrapped the beam against her taillight, water splattering. Dim, unsafe, hazard to everyone on the road. Viola remained steady, eyes following the beam, but not his face. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying over the reins. "My license, registration, and insurance are valid. You have them in your hand." I complied. Brennan turned sharply, his flashlight flaring against her eyes. "Don't talk back to me." The street around them was silent, save for the rains. Lights glowed faintly in the windows of the grand homes that lined the road, wide porches, stone facades, manicured hedges bent under the weight of water. Wealth slept behind those walls, indifferent. The confrontation on the street did not penetrate the glass. To Brennan, the setting only magnified his stage. He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're calm, but I see it. People like you, always hiding something. Out here at night, dressed down, driving through a place you don't belong. You don't fool me." Daniels looked away, watching rain ripple across the cruiser's windshield. He muttered under his breath, unheard except by himself. "She's not the one fooling anyone." Viola took a breath, tasting metal in the air. Her daughter's face flickered across her mind, the homework, the cold dinner waiting. She chose her words as carefully as she had taught her daughter to do. "Officer, I have complied with every instruction. I will continue to comply." The answer, level and precise, might have ended a normal stop. But Brennan thrived on escalation. He stepped back, dripping rain from his chin, and gestured with his flashlight. "Mark her down, non-compliant, disorderly." His words cut the air with the same casual certainty as someone ordering a drink. Inside the car, unnoticed, the phone camera blinked red. Unlike the body cam fixed to Brennan's chest, a device prone to technical malfunctions when rains interfered, the phone caught everything. The thrum of water, the bite in Brennan's words, the steadiness in Viola's tone. The record was unbroken. Across town, in a quiet office lined with books and fluorescent hum, Eliza Reed glanced at her phone. A late-night message pinged from an unknown number. "If you want to see what justice looks like, watch this." She frowned, curious but unaware the file would soon reach her desk in a case that would change her month, her year, perhaps her career. Back on Reynolds Road, Brennan loomed over Viola, the reins his curtain, the flashlight his spotlight. The neighborhood remained silent, unaware. He smirked, confident in the pattern he knew so well. Intimidation, compliance, paperwork filed, complaint dismissed. But on her dashboard, the red light of the phone burned steady. Every word and every shadow stored away. Unlike the rains, unlike memory, unlike the silence of wealthy houses, the camera would not forget. Brennan circled the sedan as if it were prey cornered in a cage. The flashlight beam leapt from the rear bumper to the hood, then lingered on the polished paint. His lips curled into a smirk. "Nice car," he sneered. "Where'd you steal it? Black woman driving through this neighborhood in a ride this clean? You really think you belong here?" Viola stood still in the rain, the water running down her hair into her collar, soaking her sweater until it clung like armor made of stone. Her face gave nothing away. No answer, no shift, only eyes that followed his path. Silence can unnerve a man more than words, and it began to itch at him. He stopped suddenly, turned toward her, his voice sharp enough to slice through the storm. "You hear me? You think that calm act means something? You think keeping your mouth shut makes you better? Look at me when I'm talking to you." She raised her chin a fraction, her gaze steady. She looked directly at him without defiance, but without submission either. It was the look of someone who had measured storms far greater than this rain and survived them. Brennan's smirk cracked into anger. "Don't you dare look at me like that." He took one step closer, voice rising. "You know what you are out here? Nothing. In this neighborhood, people like you bow your heads and keep moving. You're not special. You're not different from the rest of the trash out there." The words spat through the rain, each insult heavier than the drops that pounded the asphalt. Daniels shifted again in the cruiser, his discomfort plain in the tightening of his jaw, the way his hand hovered near the door handle but never moved to intervene. Viola said nothing. Her silence stretched long enough to press against Brennan's anger, like a mirror reflecting his own image back at him. Inside her mind, a memory surfaced. Her daughter, eyes wide one evening, asking, "Mom, why are people afraid of the police?" Viola had answered gently then, carefully, believing in the power of dignity over fear. Tonight, her answer was written not in words, but in the unbroken calm of her stance. Brennan slammed his palm down hard on the trunk of the sedan. The hollow thud cracked the silence, startling even Daniels. "Non-compliant," Brennan shouted. "Disorderly. Thinks she can talk circles around me." His voice echoed off the manicured hedges and gated driveways. Porch lights flickered in the distance, but no doors opened. The rain swallowed witnesses whole. He pulled the cuffs from his belt, the metal glinting in the beam of his flashlight. "Hands behind your back. Now." For a moment, the reins seemed to pause around her. Viola moved with quiet precision, turning, clasping her wrists behind her as if she were placing them in invisible hands of her own choosing. She did not argue. She did not plead. The only sound was the click of steel meeting steel, locking shut. The chill of the cuffs cut through the storm, colder than the water running down her arms. Brennan tightened them unnecessarily until the metal bit her skin. He leaned close, his words seething. "This is what happens when you forget your place." The flashlight caught her face just long enough for Daniels to see her expression. It was not fear, it was not defeat. It was stillness, carved from stone, something that did not yield even under chains. Brennan stepped back, satisfied with the sight. He pulled out his notepad, scribbling with quick strokes as if paperwork could sanctify his anger. "Subject: Hayes, Viola," he wrote. The name meant nothing to him, just another line in a report he believed would vanish like the others, buried under Union shields and shrugged off complaints. Daniels glanced at the note, his brow furrowed. Hayes. The name echoed faintly, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on the rain beating down the windshield. Brennan tore the page free, tucking it into his pocket as if the act were final. Viola lifted her head, rain dripping from her hair, eyes fixed not on him, but on some point beyond, a horizon he could not see. The cuffs might have bound her wrists, but not her dignity. That remained untouched, standing tall in the downpour, waiting. Back at the sedan, the phone camera kept recording. It captured the insult, the thud on the trunk, the bite of the cuffs, and the name Brennan had spoken out loud when he scrawled it on paper. The rains blurred the wealthy homes behind them, but the lens caught what mattered. The truth was there, etched in pixels, waiting for its day in court. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle by the time Viola stepped out of the station. Hours in a holding room had left her shoulders stiff, her clothes damp with the smell of metal and disinfectant. The night air was colder than she remembered. She walked to her car, each step deliberate, as if she were crossing a threshold between one life and another. Inside the sedan, the dashboard light glowed dim. On the passenger seat sat the paper bag she had carried hours earlier. The box inside was no longer warm. Grease had seeped into the bottom, and the steam that once curled upward was gone. The dinner she had promised her daughter had become a quiet emblem of time lost, of dignity tested. She rested her forehead on the steering wheel, letting the rhythm of raindrops fill the silence. It was then that her daughter's voice came back to her, not in words repeated exactly, but in the memory of a kitchen table conversation weeks ago. "Mom, why do people get so nervous when they see police lights behind them?" The innocence of the question had pierced her then. Tonight, it returned like a demand. Her hands tightened on the wheel. The temptation to let it go, to drive home, to set the box on the table and pretend nothing had happened, pressed heavily on her. She had endured humiliation before. She had climbed over walls of doubt before. Maybe silence would mean safety, for her career, for her family, for the fragile peace she had built. But the other voice inside her rose louder. If she swallowed this, Brennan's sneer would not end with her. Tomorrow, it would be another driver on another quiet street, another woman told she didn't belong, another child waiting at home with cold dinner on the table, wondering why respect seemed so expensive. A young man pulled over for a broken light he never knew was faulty. An elder forced to step out of her car in the rain because her accent made her answers sound uncooperative. A teenager handcuffed on the curb while neighbors watched, learning too early what power looked like when it was abused. The thought burned. She pictured her daughter asleep upstairs, unaware of the night's events, still believing in the answer Viola had once given, that dignity can withstand fear. To betray that promise now was unthinkable. Her phone buzzed on the console. A message lit the screen. "Call me when you're ready." It was Eliza Reed, the military lawyer whose counsel she trusted. Viola stared at the name for a long moment. Calling meant commitment. It meant files, hearings, cross-examinations. It meant Brennan's smirk would not be the last insult she endured. The system itself would bare its teeth. Her pulse quickened. She thought of the questions that would follow. Why were you in that neighborhood? What were you wearing? Did you provoke him? The weight of scrutiny pressed against her chest. She could already hear the whispers. She's doing this for attention, for money, for revenge. The thought nearly broke her resolve. Then her gaze fell again on the paper bag. The meal had grown cold, but its meaning had sharpened. It was not just food, it was a marker of stolen time, of humiliation carried past her own skin into her home. She whispered into the quiet car, her voice almost lost under the patter of rain. Not for me, for her, and for everyone who's had to bow their heads when they shouldn't have. The words steadied her. The fear remained, but purpose edged sharper. She reached for the phone, the glow reflecting in her eyes. With a long breath, she pressed call. Miles away, Eliza Reed answered on the second ring. Her voice was calm, certain, professional. "Viola, I heard what happened. You know this isn't just about you." "I know," Viola said softly. "That's why we can't let it pass." Outside, the drizzle softened further, mist rising from the pavement. The neighborhood was asleep, but inside the car, a decision had been born. The cold dinner beside her was no longer just a reminder of loss. It was the first piece of evidence in her private trial of conscience, now carried forward into a public battle. The next morning, Viola sat across from Eliza Reed in a narrow office lined with case files. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in slivers of light that cut across the desk. Eliza had already read the message, had already seen the clip recorded on Viola's phone. She looked at Viola with the kind of steadiness that comes from years of fighting uphill battles. "If you stay silent," Eliza began, her voice low but certain, "this will happen again. And not just once. Dozens of people, maybe more, will face the same thing. This is not just about you." Viola listened, hands folded in her lap. She had slept only a few hours, her body still sore from the cold steel of the cuffs. Every word from Eliza sounded heavier than the rain from the night before. "I know the risks," Viola said. "If I file, they'll dig into my record. They'll try to spin this into ambition, revenge, anything but what it is." "They will," Eliza agreed. "They'll question your motives. They'll ask if you want money, if you want attention. They'll pull at threads in your career and your private life. That's how they fight. But that doesn't change the truth of what happened." The room fell quiet except for the ticking of the clock. Viola thought again of her daughter, of the cold dinner still sitting uneaten on the table when she came home. That image had become her compass. She lifted her eyes to Eliza. We moved forward. Eliza gave a single nod. She reached across the desk and set the phone down between them, the red recording icon still frozen in the video file. This is your witness. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't forget. The paperwork began that same morning. Lines of text filled forms, declarations, and affidavits. Words on paper that would open doors into courtrooms where truth and perception would collide. The complaint was signed, sealed, and filed. Viola Hayes versus Sergeant Mitch Brennan. Elsewhere, in a precinct office that smelled of burnt coffee and stale air, Captain Richard Malloy flipped through his morning stack. When he saw the name on the complaint, he snorted. Viola Hayes, he muttered. Another citizen looking for a payout. He dropped the file onto his desk without a second glance. Years of seeing complaints dissolve had taught him to shrug them off. To him, it was routine, another piece of paper that would vanish into the system. Brennan, leaning in the doorway, smirked when the captain waved the file aside. Thought so, he said. These things never stick. His tone carried the confidence of 20 untouched complaints, each one dismissed, each one reinforcing his belief in his own invincibility. Across town, in the courthouse, Judge Clarence Doyle scanned the day's filings. His pen underlined a fresh case number, Hayes v. Brennan. He tapped the page once, then set it in the stack of hearings to come. To him, it was another case waiting in line. To her, it was the fight of a lifetime. Back at Eliza's office, however, the story was different. She sat late into the night, combing through old records, faded forms, scanned reports, internal memos, each telling a story that had never reached daylight. And then she saw the pattern. 20 separate complaints, all tied to Brennan, each one echoing the same accusations: racial bias, unlawful stops, intimidation, and every single one had been stamped with the same phrase, insufficient evidence. Eliza leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. 20 times, she whispered, and not once held accountable. She tapped the stack of dismissed complaints against the desk, the sound sharp in the still office. This was more than a single case. This was a chain waiting to break. When Viola returned the next morning, Eliza slid the stack across the table. This isn't just your fight anymore, she said. It never was. Viola placed her hand on the papers, feeling the weight of lives behind each page. The flame that had sparked in her car the night before grew brighter. What had begun as humiliation in the rain was now something larger, a fire aimed not only at Brennan, but at the silence that had protected him. The envelope was heavier than it looked. Sergeant Mitch Brennan held it in one hand, his thumb rubbing the crease where the paper had been sealed. The words stamped across the front were plain: summons to appear. He tore it open, scanned the lines, and gave a short, humorless laugh. Court date, he muttered. Just another complaint. At the precinct, a couple of officers leaned in. One smirked. What's new, Brennan? You've dodged 20 of those. You'll dodge 20 more. Another clapped him on the back. Don't sweat it. They all crumble once the paperwork hits the desk. You know how it goes. Brennan folded the paper once, twice, stuffing it into his pocket. He shrugged as if it were nothing. Chuyen ku thoi, he said with a smirk. His voice carried the same easy confidence that had shielded him for years. But when the chatter faded and the locker room emptied, silence pressed against him. He sat on the bench, elbows on his knees, the summons still crisp in his pocket. For a moment, he stared at the floor tiles, the edges blurred in memory. He saw a woman in a hallway years ago, her hands trembling as she held a denial letter. She had complained of harassment, and the investigation had ended with insufficient evidence. Her shoulders shook, and her child clung to her side, confused by her tears. He saw a man once, restrained on the curb after a stop. The man's voice had echoed raw and furious. "Where is justice? Where is it now?" The complaint had been dismissed 2 weeks later. The images flashed, unbidden, across his mind. For an instant, they unsettled him. The envelope in his pocket felt heavier. He rubbed his hands together, as if the friction could erase what he had seen. The memories were dangerous. They cracked the surface of the armor he had built. His jaw tightened. He shook his head hard, dismissing the flickers. No one's touched me before. No one's going to now. He rose from the bench, pulling his jacket tight. By the time he reached the door, the smirk had returned. The summons was just another paper, another storm he would outlast. In the squad room, Daniels glanced up as Brennan passed. The younger officer caught the edge of the smirk, the practiced swagger, but he also noticed the faint crease between Brennan's brows, a crack quickly covered. Daniels said nothing, but the look lingered. Back at his desk, Brennan unfolded the summons again. The name stared back at him. Viola Hayes. He read it twice, then let the paper drop onto the pile. He leaned back in his chair, the sound of rain against the window faint in the distance. For a heartbeat, the weight of 20 complaints pressed close. Whispering of consequences long avoided. Then, with a slow exhale, he buried them beneath the same words that had carried him through every investigation, every dismissal. No one touches me. Not now. Not ever. The words were quiet, spoken to no one, but they carried the certainty of a man who believed in his own untouchable shadow. The courtroom was full before the session began. Reporters crowded the benches, pens and cameras ready. Members of the public leaned forward, waiting for a story they could carry outside into headlines and conversations. At the front, Judge Clarence Doyle entered, his robe heavy, his expression deliberate. He adjusted his glasses, looked over the docket, and called the case. Hayes versus Brennan. The words echoed through the wood-paneled chamber. Viola sat at the plaintiff's table, calm, her posture steady. Eliza Reed beside her organized files with precise movements, each page already memorized. Across the aisle, Brennan sat stiff in uniform, jaw set, eyes restless. His attorney Carl Peters leaned toward him with whispered instructions that Brennan barely seemed to hear. The air itself felt charged, as if the storm from that night had followed them indoors. Silence held until Judge Doyle's gavel struck once. "Proceed." Eliza rose. Her voice was even, clipped to the rhythm of fact. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, what you will see today is not a question of interpretation. It is a pattern, a choice repeated, and finally, a truth recorded." She tapped the remote in her hand. The screen flickered to life. The body cam footage began. Rain streaked across the lens. Brennan's flashlight beam darted, his voice loud over the static of water. "Taillights dim," he said. 2 minutes later, pressed by Viola's calm insistence, he changed it. "Swerving in the lane." 5 minutes after that, when she produced her paperwork, another claim emerged. Suspicious vehicle in a restricted neighborhood. The sequence unfolded in real time. 3 different reasons in 10 minutes. The chamber stirred. Reporters scribbled furiously. Judge Doyle leaned forward, his brows narrowing. At the defense table, Peters shifted uncomfortably. He cleared his throat, but Brennan's jaw only tightened. He stared at the floor as his own words played back, each contradiction stacked like stones. Eliza let the silence after the clip linger. Then she clicked again. The next screen lit with Viola's phone video. The view was clean, the lens steady. Headlights washed the rain, Wipers beat in rhythm, but the road was clear. No swerving, no sudden turns, no violation of speed or lane. The sound was sharper here. Brennan's tone cut through, each insult preserved. Black woman in a car like this. Where'd you steal it? You think you belong here? You're not different from the rest of the trash. The words filled the courtroom. No one spoke. Every syllable had been caught by the phone's microphone. Steady, unblinking. On the bench behind Brennan, Officer Daniels sat in uniform. He had been subpoenaed as a witness, but for now he was only an observer. As Brennan's voice echoed, Daniels' shoulders slumped. He stared at the floor, his hands clenched, his silence louder than any objection. Eliza turned back to the jury. The body cam faltered in the rain. The phone did not. You see the pattern? You hear the truth. Judge Doyle nodded once, his gavel tapping lightly. Continue. Brennan's attorney rose, tried to object. Context matters. Officers must make split-second decisions. Eliza cut him cleanly. 3 split-second decisions in 10 minutes, each contradicting the last. That is not context. That is fabrication. The gallery stirred again, whispers rolling like waves. Reporters leaned closer, catching every phrase. For many in the room, it was the first time they had heard such language played aloud in a court of law. Eliza paused, letting the weight settle. Then she turned back to her table, lifted one more sheet of paper, and faced the court. Your Honor, before we continue, it is my duty to properly introduce my client. She has been referred to in this courtroom simply as Ms. Hayes, but the record must be complete. She drew in a breath, her words crisp. General Viola Hayes, United States Army. The words landed like a stone dropped in water. The room froze. Reporters' pens stopped mid-line. A collective intake of breath filled the silence. At the defense table, Brennan's head jerked up. His mouth opened, but no sound came. For the first time, he looked directly at Viola, and the color drained from his face. Behind him, Daniel's eyes widened. He shifted in his seat, a flash of recognition and regret crossing his features. Around the gallery, murmurs erupted. Shock breaking through the formal silence of the court. Judge Doyle rapped the gavel sharply. Order. The room stilled again, but the current had changed. Brennan's attorney leaned toward him, whispering fast, but Brennan sat rigid, his confidence punctured. All those years believing complaints would vanish, that he was untouchable, now collided with the revelation of who sat across from him. Eliza returned to her seat, her expression calm. Viola did not move, her face composed, her eyes steady. She had not raised her voice. She had not needed to. The evidence was on record. The name was on record. And for the first time, the stage belonged not to the man who had wielded power in the rain, but to the woman he had tried to diminish. The courtroom held a silence that wasn't empty, but charged, like the moment before thunder when the air seems to wait. Reporters hovered over notepads and open laptops, pens, cameras pointed. Judge Clarence Doyle watched without comment, his gaze steady. The wooden clock beat a slow second, measuring the room's attention more faithfully than any gavel. Eliza Reed rose. She carried a stack of folders that looked ordinary until she set them down. The thud said otherwise. What happened on that rainy night was not a lone misjudgment, she said, voice even, unhurried. It is the 21st entry in a pattern the department failed to stop. She opened the first folder. 7 years ago. Darrell Jones, warehouse shift, 11 p.m. stop. Officer claimed a broken tail light. Mr. Jones asked for a check on the spot. He was cuffed and held overnight. Next morning, the light worked. He lost his job for missing his shift. He filed a complaint. It was marked insufficient evidence. She reached for the next. 4 years ago, Anna Morales, a nurse, 14 hours on the floor, still in scrubs, badge clipped to her pocket. She kept the wheel straight. The stop came anyway, accused of swerving. In the flashlight's cone, her hands shook so hard she could not find her insurance card. She offered a breath test, a blood test. She passed both. She sat on the curb while the officer wrote nothing and everything. Her phone lit over and over with her son's name. He was waiting at their apartment window, watching for her. She lifted a third. 2 years ago, Marcus Ellison. He was taking his kids to school. They were 10 and 8. He was ordered out. His knees hit the asphalt. His children pressed their palms to the glass and cried for him. He was released without charge. The file says the same 2 words. Eliza closed the folders gently, palms flat on the stack. "These are not numbers," she said. "They are nights that never ended for the people who lived them. They are the sound of a child in an empty kitchen asking why dinner is cold. They are the bruise that fades from skin, but not from memory. They are 20 citizens told to accept that nothing happened." A woman in the back wiped her eyes. A man near the aisle stared down at his hands. At the defense table, Sergeant Mitch Brennan stared straight ahead. His jaw worked, the muscles at his temple ticked. His attorney, Carl Peters, leaned close and whispered, but the words slid past. He saw Jones again, how the man's shoulders collapsed when the morning inspection proved the light was fine, and yet the night in the cell counted for more. He saw Morales, voice splintering as the beam shook in the rain and made her look like a suspect to herself. He saw Ellison on his knees, not because the law required it, but because power enjoyed it. And behind the glass, 2 small faces wet with a confusion that would turn into something harder later. The images pressed forward like figures behind frosted glass, not quite visible. Impossible to ignore. He swallowed. For the width of a breath, he wondered what it would have been like to handle those stops clean, to end them with an apology, to let people go home. He pushed it away. 20 complaints had come and gone. Paperwork had always softened the edges. Memory bent if you leaned on it long enough. He told himself what he had told himself for years. No one touched me before. No one will now. Eliza set a single folder on top of the stack. "And now, complaint 21, she said. Viola Hayes. Same street logic. Same suspicion without cause. Same language meant to reduce a person to a target. This time the record didn't blink." She lifted the remote. On the monitors, the phone footage replayed a portion the court had already seen, now framed by the files on the podium. Headlights combed rain. The engine idled steady. The lane line held still as a ruled page. Then the voice, a sneer that the microphone preserved without mercy. "Nice ride. Where'd you steal it? You think you belong here?" Eliza let the audio hang. She clicked again. The body cam showed the changes. Tail light, then swerving, then a restricted neighborhood. 3 explanations stacked within 10 minutes, like a house of cards. "This is the pattern inside the pattern," she said. "'Cause adjusted to fit outcome." Judge Doyle leaned forward. The jurors watched with the concentration of people learning how something breaks. Brennan shifted. The room felt smaller. The collar of his uniform scratched. He slid a finger under the edge as if adding air would add time. Peters murmured, "Say nothing." Brennan's knee bounced once, a tremor he could not stop. Eliza turned from the screen to the jurors. "I am not asking you to trust feelings," she said. "I am asking you to trust what you can see and hear." The department asked citizens to accept silence. The camera refuses. The gallery tightened, pulled by a gravity that was not outrage but recognition. Something known at street level now had a transcript. Brennan broke his stillness with words that he didn't intend to leave his mouth. If I'd known she was a general, I wouldn't have wasted my time. The sentence landed with the dull weight of an admission and the bright flare of contempt. Even Peters flinched. A reporter's pen drew a straight, stunned line across a page. Officer Daniels sat behind Brennan, hands linked, knuckles pale, his eyes closed. He had stood beside Brennan on too many nights that rhymed with the stories on the podium. Silence had always felt like the safer uniform. Now, it felt like surrender. Eliza did not answer. She did not need to. She returned to counsel table and set the remote down beside Viola's phone. The tiny red dot in the corner of the screen was long since gone, but the idea of it seemed to glow. Viola rose. She did not speak. She let the room arrive at her. Pens stopped. The murmur sank. Someone in the second row coughed and then seemed sorry. The light from the windows cut pale rectangles across the floor. Viola placed her fingertips on the table as if to steady the wood rather than herself. Her eyes moved across the room, jury, press, gallery, officers, as though acknowledging each one's part in the moment. She drew a measured breath. "A badge," she said at last, "is not a license to humiliate. It is not a shield against the law. It is a promise, one you make to the public every time you pin it on. A promise to serve, to protect, to treat every citizen with dignity." She let the words rest. Then she finished, slower, the sentence landing with the inevitability of a gavel. When that promise is broken, the badge is only metal, and metal rusts. Silence followed, full, heavy, clarifying. Then the room erupted into motion without noise at first, hands diving for keyboards, thumbs for screens. Then, with the sound of keys, the soft storms of camera shutters, the small exclamations of reporters who knew the line that would carry beyond these walls. On a laptop in the second row, a headline formed in a single clean stroke. Sergeant Brennan's record exposed. General Hayes speaks. Send buttons flashed. Alerts flew outward like birds from a bell tower. Brennan saw the glow of screens, the quick nods between reporters, the ripple he could not catch. His breath shortened. He imagined those old files, once his cushion, now tinder. Judge Doyle rapped twice. "Order. We will recess for 15 minutes. People stood. The benches sighed. The doors opened and admitted the distant city, the hum of air vents. Viola sat. Eliza placed a hand near, but not on hers. The phone lay between them, black glass reflecting the ceiling lights in thin white bars. Brennan did not move. He looked at the space on the table where his badge used to feel like certainty, even when he wasn't wearing it. Peters whispered again. Words about posture and juries and later, but Brennan heard only the echo he had been using as armor for years. It sounded thin now. "No one touches me." In the rows behind, Daniels opened his eyes. He watched Viola for a long second and then looked down at his own hands. Outside the courtroom, the headline was already on home screens and news tickers. Inside, the quiet returned, the kind of quiet that follows a bell when its ring has ended, but the air still knows it rang. The courtroom felt heavier than the air outside, as if every pane of glass pressed inward with the weight of anticipation. When Judge Clarence Doyle returned to the bench, the murmur faded into a silence so taut it seemed ready to snap. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the papers in front of him, then at the jury. His tone was steady, deliberate. "This court finds Sergeant Mitch Brennan guilty." The word landed like a hammer. Gasps spread. One woman in the gallery covered her mouth with both hands. A man let out a sharp "yes" before being hushed. Brennan's shoulders jolted as though struck. Peters closed his eyes, lips pressed tight. Judge Doyle continued. Damages awarded to General Viola Hayes, $5 million. The number drew a low ripple. Reporters scribbled furiously. Some in the audience nodded, others shook their heads in disbelief. Viola sat without flinching, hands folded, eyes forward. Brennan twisted in his chair, jaw clenching hard enough to tremor. Doyle's voice did not soften. Sergeant Brennan is hereby sentenced to 7 years in state prison for abuse of authority, misconduct under color of law, and aggravated violation of civil rights. The gallery erupted. Shouts of approval, tears, scattered applause quickly silenced by a gavel rap. Brennan's face drained. His mother, seated in the second row, lowered her head into her hands. Daniels stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "And, furthermore," Doyle said, each word sharp, "the police department will be placed under independent oversight for a period of 3 years. All standard operating procedures will undergo reform. Mandatory anti-bias training will be instituted." This time, the chamber swelled with a different sound, not shock, but a rising murmur that felt like relief. People nodded, some clasped hands as if a locked door had cracked open at last. Each announcement had been a blow. First guilt, then money, then prison, then systemic change. Brennan sagged lower with each. By the last, he no longer looked like an untouchable officer, but a man stripped bare before his peers. When the gavel stilled the room again, reporters leapt into action. Voices rose in a storm of questions aimed not at the judge, not at Brennan, but at Viola. "Are you doing this for money? Was this about revenge? Isn't this for your own career, your own reputation?" The words clashed in the air like thrown stones. Cameras leaned toward her, microphones stretched. Viola did not stand immediately. She waited, letting the storm spend itself. She watched as the questions overlapped, tangled, repeated. She let the noise rise until it could go no higher, and then waited longer until it began to fall under its own weight. When she rose, the room steadied. "I did not come here for money," she said, voice even. "I did not come here for recognition. I came because silence feeds injustice. I came because too many people before me had no voice. I came because my daughter and yours deserve better." The room stilled again. She looked directly at the row of reporters, eyes calm. "This award will not sit in my account. The majority will fund the Community Justice Foundation. It will provide scholarships for young people of color. It will pay legal fees for those silenced by cost. It will light paths that too often end in shadows." The calmness in her voice, after the storm of questions, was sharper than any retort. Reporters lowered their microphones. Some even put pens down. Then Doyle cleared his throat. "One more order of this court. In light of testimony and evidence, all prior 20 complaints against Sergeant Brennan, previously dismissed, will be reopened and reviewed under independent authority." The reaction was immediate and raw. A woman in the gallery, one of the names in those files, broke into sobs. A man stood, fists trembling, tears running unchecked. Other victims gripped each other's hands, disbelief and relief mixing in gasps. Among the uniformed officers, eyes darted between one another, unease cutting the neat lines of their posture. Chief Malloy's face blanched. His jaw set in stone, but his hand trembled as it clenched the armrest. He knew what this meant. Not just Brennan exposed, but oversight shining on the command that had signed each dismissal. The public roared. Half applause, half shouts, all catharsis. It wasn't chaos. It was release. For once, the scales that had seemed fixed in stone tilted toward balance. Brennan lowered his head into his hands. For years, he had leaned on silence, on stamped forms, on a system that blinked when it should have seen. Now, even the ghosts of his past cases were summoned back into light. He looked smaller than he had ever seemed. Doyle's gavel fell one last time. This court is adjourned. The benches stirred, the people rose, and outside, the sound of the verdict rolled through the city like distant thunder. In the months that followed, reforms began to take root. An independent review board was appointed, and the police academy opened its doors to voices it had once kept outside. Among them was General Viola Hayes, invited not as a plaintiff, not as a soldier, but as a citizen who had lived what the recruits were training to prevent. On a clear morning, she walked into the academy classroom, carrying nothing but her notes and a small silver hairpin. The academy classroom was quiet in the way only new recruits could make it. Young faces watching with a mix of pride and unease, badges polished, notebooks open, pens still. The rows of uniforms looked crisp, untouched by nights in the rain, untouched by choices that bend judgment. General Viola Hayes stood at the front. No uniform today, no ribbons, no bars, no insignia. She wore a simple suit, her posture straight, her presence steady. In her hand, not a medal, not a plaque, but a small silver hairpin. She held it up between finger and thumb so that the light caught it. "On the night you've all heard about," she said, her voice calm, even, "I was not wearing this." She gestured toward the ribbons on her chest in the framed photo projected behind her. "I was not wearing these either. All I had was this hairpin." She let it turn once between her fingers, the metal glinting softly. "It's ordinary," she continued. "Bought in a store any of you could walk into. Worn because it kept my hair out of my face, not because it meant anything more. But when I sat on the curb in the rain, cuffed for nothing, insulted for who I was, and not what I'd done, this was all I had. Not rank, not record, not recognition. Just this." She paused, scanning the room. The recruits listened without fidgeting. Dignity does not require a uniform. It is not conferred by medals. It is not written into pay grade. It belongs to every citizen who walks these streets. And your badge, the one you carry, is not protection from the law. It is protection for those citizens, especially the ones who have no title, no voice, no defense. She closed her hand around the hairpin and lowered it slowly. The silence held. In the back row, a young man rose. His name tag read, Torres. Miguel Torres, barely 21, his badge so new it caught the light like glass. He raised it in his right hand. His voice was steady, a little louder than the room expected. "A badge is a promise," he said. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Some nodded. Others straightened their backs a little. Viola looked at him for a long moment, then gave a single, approving nod. The recruits would remember this moment. They would remember that the lesson came not from a textbook, but from a woman who had lived through the failure of the very system they were about to enter. As the class dismissed, Viola lingered a moment longer. She placed the hairpin on the lectern. The light from the high window caught it once more, flashing bright, like a star in miniature. Not gaudy, not loud, just enough to remind anyone watching that small things, ordinary things, can carry the weight of truth. The recruits filed out, one by one, their badges resting against their chests, their eyes flicking once more toward the lectern. Torres was the last to leave, glancing back, the word promise still on his lips. And when the door closed, the room stayed quiet, save for the echo of that glint. Stories like these are not just stories. They are reminders of what dignity demands, of what power must answer to, of how justice bends when no one holds it accountable. If you believe in justice served, if you believe in stories where truth stands taller than arrogance, stay with us. Subscribe to JusticeSoul. Because every badge, every promise, every voice deserves the light.